And welcome to another edition of South Texas Crossfire. This is Attorney Joe Flores reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMB, Lopez Broadcasting, and now Spectrum. I have the big honor of introducing somebody that I consider a great friend, not only to me, but to the community, someone who has stood up against bullies and stood up against corporations and has been the David to the Goliath of what's going on in America right now that I find reprehensible. And so he's provided a lot of us other lawyers with a lot of inspiration. And in his own personal life, he's had his struggles and he's triumphed as well. So I couldn't think of anybody else that's better to bring on as a guest than our dear friend, Michael Watts. Welcome.
Thank you, amigo.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Michael, I know that right now, as we speak in 2017, I guess some people that didn't know who you were, that were outside legal circles, or maybe that did not benefited from your legal prowess, didn't know your name per se, but they sure did after they tried to mess with you and things, and we'll get into that early on. But I want to build up to that because I think that people deserve to know the type of person you are and the things you've done for the community, but why. You know, you could live anywhere in the world, you've been successful, but why do you always come back to Corpus, and what was your upbringing and everything like that?
Sure.
I think people in South Texas would love to know.
Well, I mean, I was born and raised here, right at Spawn Hospital, you know, a couple blocks down the road. It's home. There's something about South Texas that just grabs you. I love the people, love the fishing, loving the hunting. As you know, my mom's here, and so there's a lot of reasons to come back home. Today we're here because my daughter's best friend is getting married tomorrow. And so we're here for a big wedding. And again, another Corpus Christi family being put together, and they're going to live right here on Louisiana Street. So that's exciting. And then most exciting thing is it's my grandson's first birthday today. So,
Congratulations. And Caleb.
Caleb?
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Congratulations to him. That's a great day. Well, and you're making me feel old. We're the same exact age, and you're already a grandfather, and I just have a teenager. I started out late, you know, but it's never too late. But so going back to that, your education, training, background, where'd you go to high school and college? And
I went to Baker Junior High School right here in Corpus, and then to King High School, and graduated in 1985. And then went off to the University of Texas, got an undergraduate degree there in kind of political science. And then went to law school there and graduated in 1989. And then I spent a year clerking for the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court before I came back home to practice law here.
Well, and you say that kind of gloss over it. Let me stop you there. It took most of us 7 years, if not more, to go through law school and undergrad combined.
Yeah.
You finished it up in 4. How'd you do it?
A lot of summer school, a lot of 20-hour semesters. You know, I enjoyed school, but I was in a hurry to get to work.
When you clerked for the Supreme Court, you know, you're already a lawyer when you clerk. A lot of people don't realize that.
Right.
What kind of cases and research did you work on?
Well, here in Texas, the highest court, as you know, is split between a criminal court and a civil court. The Supreme Court of Texas handles the appeals of all the civil cases in the state of Texas. And that was appropriate for me because I wanted to come back home and practice civil litigation. So we did all sorts of appeals from cases all over the place. One of the ones I remember, there was a pesticide company here in the United States, and their pesticide was banned as being a hazard to the health of human beings. And so what did they do? They shipped it down to Costa Rica. And 20,000 men down there lost their virility as a result of being exposed to this pesticide while working on banana plantations. And so one of the big cases is, could they bring their lawsuit up here in the United States where the poison was sent from? And so I worked on an opinion that was called the circle of poison, that, you know, we would ship those poisons down, it would come back to us in the food, and it would ship it back down, and come back to us in the food. And so the Supreme Court of Texas handles very significant cases that both sides are trying to seek appellate review of whatever happened in the trial court.
So as a young man, you were what, 21, 22 when you were with the Supreme Court?
Yeah, 21. Mm-hmm.
21, and who was the justice that you most loved working with?
Well, you know, that was the great thing. I loved the clerkship. Technically, I was employed by the Chief Justice, Thomas R. Phillips. He was a good man, and he knew that my political orientation wasn't the same as his. I mean, he was a Republican, I was a Democrat. The court at the time was split 5-4. And so everything was exciting, everything was, just right on the cusp of which way it would go. So once I got my work done, he loaned me out to some of the other justices, including Justice Lloyd Doggett, who's now a United States Congressman, Franklin Spears, C.L. Ray. And so I got to work with a bunch of the justices up there, and it was the experience of a lifetime. And it certainly prepares you to come back and practice law on the trial court level, because you know the kind of mistakes that are made. They get people reversed up at the Court of Appeals or up at the Supreme Court.
When you worked on that, what made you sort of solidify the type of law you were going to practice?
Well, to be honest with you, I knew what kind of law I was going to practice when I was 16, and I knew who I wanted to go work for.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, both my parents were lawyers at the time, but they did different kinds of work. My dad did insurance subrogation work, and my mother became a family law specialist that helped guide people through when they were getting divorced.
A darn good one.
A darn good one. But when I was 16 years old, I came home one day and I turned on ABC News, World News Tonight. I remember it like it was yesterday, and Peter Jennings is announcing a $106.7 million verdict that happened in Corpus Christi, Texas. And it involved the daughter of a man we all know, Dusty Durrell. She got hit in the rear while she was driving her Ford Mustang II, and the gas tank exploded and she burned alive in the vehicle. And it was horrific. And a man named David Perry got that verdict back in the fall of 1983. And I remember looking at the television screen, I said, that's the kind of law I want to do, and that's who I'm going to go work for. And as luck would have it, when I went to college, I did well, went to law school, I went well, and the word got back to David Perry that I wanted to come work for him, and interviewed with him, and he was kind enough to take me on as one of his associates in the September of 1990.
And those types of cases, they're horrific.
They are.
They bring such tragedy to families, and you have to work with death, disfigurement, emotional pain and anguish. How do you deal with that?
I've always said that I've never had to experience the kind of cases that people are complaining about where there's an allegation that somebody's claiming to be more injured than they are. The people that are my clients, you don't want to be my client. That means you're dead, you're a quadriplegic, you're a paraplegic, or you're burned up. And so these are catastrophic injuries that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And a lot of those folks, in order to stay alive, need horrendously expensive medical care and treatment for the rest of their life. And the only way they're going to get that is by proving what happened to them, who did something that caused their injury, and make them pay for it. It's literally a life or death situation. One of the cases that I'm proudest of is about 10 years into my career. There were all of these people across Texas and the southern half of the United States that all of a sudden were driving around in a Ford Explorer and their tire would blow out. And the next thing you know, they're rolling over in a Ford Explorer. Well, the first case in the United States was right here in Corpus Christi, Texas. A fabulous woman by the name of Donna Bailey from over in Portland, wearing her seatbelt, doing everything the right thing. Her tire gives out, rolls over, and she is a ventilator-dependent quadriplegic. And so we filed suit right here in Corpus Christi in Judge Nanette Hesset's court, and it was the first case against Ford and Firestone in the country. Ultimately, we settled that case, but what I'm proudest of it is we got her enough money to have around-the-clock nursing care for the rest of her life. And while you wouldn't want to put yourself in anyone's shoes being a ventilator-dependent quadriplegic, she has a quality of life and a longevity of life that wouldn't be possible without the lawsuit that we brought on her behalf.
When you were in your 20s, were you already a father by then? Were you already raising a young family?
Yeah. By my mid-20s, I had a daughter, and then in my late 20s, I had a second daughter. And then about my 30th birthday, I had my son, Brandon, and it goes like that as they promised as it would. Now they're 23, 20, and 19.
And when you had your family and you came home, I know like most lawyers, we say, as you said, we've never had to experience such. I do a lot of federal incarceration, things like that. People facing, rolling the dice, and they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen to their family, these disfigurements and things. A lot of people, and I wanted to take this time to talk to you because people have this broad generalization about lawyers.
Yeah.
and that we're, thick-skinned, we're cold-blooded, sharks, all these things that, and it kind of rolls off, but it really, at the end of the day, I think people need to know that when you go home, we can't talk a lot about our cases, can't share a lot of the intimate details, they share confidences, but how has your family been supportive of your efforts, and especially when you were raising a young family that you found inspiration in?
Well, it's tough on your family because, at least with the kind of cases that I did for the first 15 years of my career, all the evidence was up in Detroit. And I was constantly on the other half of the country going and litigating these cases. And I'll never forget when my first daughter was about 2.5, 3 years old, the young lady who's getting married tomorrow, best friends since they were just babies. Her name's Meredith Whitehurst. She's like a daughter to me. But we were out on Atlantic Street where we lived, and I remember I'm holding her and I'm talking like a baby, like you do with your kids, and I was just, pointing at house. Whose house is that? That's Mimi's house, Meredith's house. Whose house is that? That's so-and-so's house. And I point at my house and I said, whose house is that? And she goes, Mommy's house.
That's right.
And I said, Mommy, where does Daddy live? And my 2-year-old said, Detroit. And it just broke your heart, And so there's a sacrifice in that. On the one hand, we're trying to do the very best we can for our clients, but on the other hand, every day you're in Detroit is a day you're not with Taylor Watts, your daughter. So it's a sacrifice. But then on the other side of it, when you see the devastation that the negligence, sometimes the gross negligence of massive corporations that put profits ahead of people, when you see the devastation that those decisions cause, it just tears at your heartstrings. And it's not some person far away. There's a lady my age here in town that I went to high school. Her name is Meadow Keene. And she lost her son when a defect in a Ford vehicle right out in Flower Bluff. Somebody runs a red light, hits them, they roll over, and the son is killed when he was partially ejected, even though he was properly wearing his seatbelt. When you see that happen to somebody you went to high school with, you realize it could happen to anybody, and we tried her case in front of Judge Vargas right here in Corpus Christi, Texas. And the testimony of her and her husband about the loss that they experienced losing their son, well, you can't help but go home and just grab your kids and hug them. It's just devastating.
When we come back from our break, I was just going to start in on, talking about how your career evolved in your 30s, where you wanted it to go, and how it led to the Deepwater Horizon tragedy. Mm-hmm. And you were watching Michael Watts, attorney at law, a national practitioner, and his information, if you have any direct questions for him, is on the screen. And it's an honor to have him. We'll be back after these moments. And we're back after a brief break. You're watching South Texas Crossfire with Attorney Joe Flores, your host. And you can follow us or join the conversation at floreslawfirm.com. And our guest information will be appearing on the screen momentarily. But again, we're welcoming back Michael Watts, a national practitioner, unparalleled legal professional who has stood against giant corporations and has given a voice to those that are injured and those that have passed. And if you're just joining us, we talked about his education, training, and background, his deep commitment to South Texas and Corpus Christi, and also he became a grandfather to a 1-year-old today, so we're celebrating that as he's here. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael, we talked about some of the cases you had, but something that really tears at me, and it's teared at me a long time, torn at me rather, for a long time, not because just economic wise, I can make a living.
Sure.
The thing is that these people that have been injured by tort reform, which I like to call deform, was back in, what was the reason that we changed lawsuits and how we can bring them in Texas and across the United States when you were doing all these good things for people in your 20s, and then they cut us at the knees in your early 30s.
Right.
When you and I are 33, they start beating the drum to change all this. What really motivated? You're a political guy, you know politics, you know business, you know law. Can you educate people out there really what the basis of tort reform was?
Sure. I think over the last 20 years, there's been a very coordinated effort by corporate America to maximize its profits by not paying for its mistakes and not paying people they've injured. And so what they did is they got organized and they developed organizations. They've spent some $660 million on PR, on billboards, on advertisements, castigating what it is that trial lawyers do. And it's a kind of a form of jury tampering, if you will, because they're trying to get jurors to show up at the courthouse all ticked off at lawyers. Well, that's one thing to do, and that's a free speech right that they have. But what they've also done is they've said, well, when we really mess up and a jury of 12 citizens decides, hey, this person was harmed by corporate malfeasance and this is how much they were injured, well, now they want a cap on what they could ever be forced to pay. And so when the Republicans took over the state legislature in 2002, elections have consequences, and they came in with a broad tort reform agenda that was designed to carry the water for the corporate interests that paid for them to win the elections. And so in 2003, corporate America put itself on the back of Texas doctors. There was a bill designed to protect certain doctors, and they grabbed tort reform and they merged the bills together so that if you voted against this tort reform and caps and things like that, you were voting against your local doctor. Well, what happened is in 2003, the legislature implemented $250,000 caps for non-pecuniary damages in all medical malpractice cases. And so what that meant is that if your mom is in a nursing home and she's completely ignored, and she dies of sepsis because she has decubitus ulcers that nobody's taking care of, she's not worth anything more than $250,000. If you have a child, my grandson, my son, anybody that doesn't have wage earning capacity, and an Exxon truck runs a red light and kills that child is worth $250,000, not a dime more. And so what they've done is they've stripped the economic viability of a lot of these kinds of lawsuits, and it's had very bad effects in terms of safety of both our youngest and our oldest citizens. There's no real economic incentive for people running nursing homes to do the right thing because they don't have any real liability at all. There's nobody that can check them for when they stuff too many patients in there. They don't have enough nurses in there. There's nobody that can check them when they make bad decisions that lead to death and human injury because the legislature's put in these caps. And these caps in Texas came first, but you're seeing it all over the United States in a lot of different ways. In Congress right now, Hillary Clinton loses to Donald Trump. The first thing that happened is the American corporations, who can now give all the money they want under the Citizens United case, and they can hide it. The voters don't know where the money's coming from, but it's huge, massive contributions from the largest corporations in the world trying to dictate who's going to be elected president, who's going to control the Senate, who's going to control the House. Well, they won this election. And as a result, there's bills that have already passed the House that are in the Senate designed to put caps on medical malpractice cases across the United States, designed to put all sorts of caps on class action litigation and mass tort litigation. And people's rights are going to be stripped away so that a corporation that makes $10 billion a year can make $11 billion a year. And it's happening pervasively across the United States, and people don't even know it until they call in and they've got somebody who was killed because of an Exxon truck, their kid was killed, or a nursing home, mom died of a sepsis, and they say, what can you do for me, Mr. Watts? And I can say, all you can get is $250,000. That's all your mom is worth, according to the Republicans in the state legislature. So I tell them to call their legislature because there's nothing I can do for them.
Well, it's terrible. I think
It's
a lot
awful.
of people don't understand the ramifications. So many people have come into my office wanting me to do medical malpractice, and they ask, and they say, well, Joe, why is my mother worth $250,000 when if a doctor or a lawyer gets injured and they chop off the wrong leg, he can get economic damages and maybe get 10 times that much of a settlement?
Sure.
It just doesn't make sense.
Well, and it was all a big fraud anyway from the standpoint of it's supposed to bring down the cost of insurance. and yet the cost of insurance continues to rise.
Banner days.
Yeah, and what really happened is in 2001, a lot of the insurance companies had their profits tied into all the tech companies, and when the dot-com bust happened, they all lost money, and they said, we need to raise premiums. They did it again after 2009. Every year, the health insurance premiums are going up 15, 20, 25%. It has nothing to do with lawyers. It has everything to do with just massive profits for these conglomerates, these multi-billion dollar corporations that are just taking it straight out of the pockets of honest American citizens trying to make a living.
So when we talk about the caps, and you've gotten around in very creative ways of senior pleadings and busted those caps,
Sure.
and sort of with punitive damages and things like that, when you go after a corporation, they're not exactly going to go, oh, it's Michael Watts, let's play by the rules. They often come after you personally.
Sure.
They threaten you with sanctions. They threaten you, like when we get into Deepwater Horizon in the last segment of our show, they went after you personally. I mean, so it takes a great deal of courage to go after these guys because they play for keeps.
Sure, it's warfare. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They come after you. They've got all the economic might in order to be able to restrict the ability of our clients, who are just average people on the street, who've been injured by these corporations' conduct, and they're going to do everything in their power to avoid having to pay the debt that they owe to that person that they hurt or killed. And it's part of the war that they go after the people fighting for the little guy. They attack trial lawyers politically. They attack trial lawyers from a standpoint of, YouTube, from the standpoint of internet, from the standpoint of advertisements. I've shown up in Chicago to try a case in a county just outside of Chicago, and there's a local newspaper article just spamming me to death right before we're going to pick the case, the jury for the trial. And so it's media warfare now. And in the last 20 years, corporate America, particularly under George W. Bush's administration, has taken to criminally prosecuting trial lawyers for whatever they can think of as well.
How do you respond? People will say it must be mind-numbing to them that they're throwing all this on you. You don't never let them see you sweat, as they say.
Well, the beauty of any situation is you've always got a jury of your peers that can decide it. And anybody can throw spaghetti up on the wall, but it doesn't mean it's going to stick. Through 27 years of practice in law, I've never had a sanction against me that was filed in front of the Ethics Commission that was sustained in any sort of way.
Right.
I've never, been in a situation where somebody has accused me like what happened last year, ever. And so you start to believe, well, hey, they won't bring charges unless it's true. And what I realize is that's not true. They're going to do whatever they can. Right. Invoke whatever levers, whether it's civil liability, media spamming, criminal charges, whatever it takes to slow down the people that are coming after them. And so we have two choices. We can take it and cower down and go away and leave the battlefield, or we can fight twice as hard, and that's what we're doing.
Well, we're going to take a little brief break. When we come back, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of all that, of how they've singled out and targeted lawyers like you, like me, like a lot of lawyers that'll stand up for what's right and for the people. So we're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking with Michael Watts about how corporations and the power that they have can even go after your own lawyer when we come back. And we're back, South Texas Crossfire with Joe Flores, attorney at law, and you can catch us also on social media and on Twitter and Facebook and all that good stuff, and KTMB. We're back with Michael Watts, and he has a national practice. If you don't know who he is, I guess you've been living in a cave a little bit, but he made national news, and he's also talked about his life and also the struggles he's had just for being a lawyer, just for doing his sworn duty, how he's had to face adversity personally, and his family has had to face adversity personally for doing that. So welcome back, Michael.
Thank you.
Listen, when I'll never forget, I was at the YMCA, as usual, struggling with my weight. And Victor Wajardo was there, some other good lawyers who were working out, and we saw that they couldn't turn off this Deepwater Horizon thing, and British Petroleum had caused all this, and apparently even President Obama was not happy about it, and a lot of people weren't happy about it, and there was a lot of damage. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the Deepwater Horizon, and for those of you who maybe haven't seen the movie or whatever, it's about that biggest oil spill ever, in here in the United States. Am I right?
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
And dead on accurate.
It's dead on accurate.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in this case?
Well, for the last 15 years of my career, I've been doing cases that involve injuries to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people from the same conduct. It's called mass tort litigation. Beginning in 2001 and again in 2003, right here in Corpus Christi, Texas, we would try the first case in the country with respect to a given medical product or a pharmaceutical drug that would impact tens of thousands of people at once. And so through the course of trying those cases, we became specialized in an area of law known as mass torts, where you've got a large number of people that are victimized by a single course of conduct. In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina, the Federal Emergency Management Agency had to come up with housing for hundreds of thousands of people displaced when New Orleans was flooded and Mississippi was wiped out. And so they contracted with a bunch of travel trailer mobile home manufacturers to build as many of them as they could as quick as they could. Well, these manufacturers took a shortcut. Instead of buying their wood here in the United States, which by law is required to be low formaldehyde emitting, formaldehyde is a carcinogen and we don't want to be breathing it. Instead of using the good wood, they bought it from China and it had this heavy formaldehyde off-gassing. And so we put people into hot, humid environments in homes that had formaldehyde, that they were just being gassed with a carcinogen. So we filed suit on behalf of about 30,000 people in the New Orleans, Mississippi area who had all been subjected to formaldehyde emissions because of the conduct of these companies. And eventually we got a settlement for that. On April the 20th of 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon exploded, it caused an oil spill, and that oil began heading right to where all of our clients from the FEMA litigation were. And so I was asked to come back in and get involved again.
So let me stop you there.
Sure.
First they take this hit, these poor victims,
Oh, yeah.
breathing in formaldehyde. What kind of damages did they have from the formaldehyde inhalation?
Caused all sorts of pulmonary problems, health problems and the like.
And then this natural disaster hits and leaves them homeless.
I mean, these poor folks, number one, they get hit by Katrina. Number two, they get hit by formaldehyde supplied to them by their own government. And then they get hit a third time inside of 5 years with an oil spill that had the effect of shutting down the entire economy of coastal cities along the Gulf of Mexico, all the way from here in Texas to the Florida Keys. And so it was devastating.
So they called you in.
Yeah, well, what happened was that we had a whole bunch of clients that we had just represented in the FEMA litigation, and so oil's headed right there, and the next thing you know, the word's getting out, and we've got 44,000 people that we think we've been retained to represent. Unfortunately, there were some people in Mississippi who are now sitting in federal prison that committed a huge theft of us and a massive fraud that made up a bunch of names that they just took out of phone books. And then instead of just admitting that they stole from us, they doubled down and they went into a Social Security Administration database and lifted financial information for the people that they told us that they were representing.
And they wanted just money from you and try to take advantage of it.
Sure. Whenever you're doing one of these mass torts, there's a huge investment of money that is put in. And typically these cases are signed up at what's called town hall meetings, which is permitted by the law. Ethical, permitted, but expensive. And so these folks were supposed to be doing town hall meetings with a law firm that we had engaged in Mississippi. And they sending us videos, oh, here's one in New Orleans, and here's one in Mississippi, and here's one in Florida, and thousands of cases coming in. And it turns out that there were thousands of cases coming in, but instead of just being satisfied with the 20,000 real cases that we had, they made up 20,000 cases and sent them right along, which created just a massive debacle because I spend the next 2 years of my life reading through, together with other good lawyers, 86 million pages of documents, taking 360 depositions. We're 2 weeks out of trial and getting ready to try the biggest case of the century against BP, against Halliburton, against Transocean, against Cameron, so the judge can decide who's at fault for this mess that was created and who's liable for punitive damages. And the consequences of that case were just overwhelming. We're talking about the differences of tens of billions of dollars of liability. And 2 weeks before the trial's supposed to begin, where I'm taking on BP, my government raids my offices 2 weeks before this trial.
Is that a coincidence?
It was damn sure odd timing, and it made me the story. First day of trial, I mean, there's huge federal courtroom, and there's press there, 2-3 rows deep, hundreds of them. And instead of the story becoming about BP, it became about the lawyer who was suing BP.
And let's rewind it.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before, you're living at your house, minding your own business, preparing for trial. And did you get any notice that the government was going to come in your house, blowing down your doors or searching or seizing computers?
Actually, I was on my way to Miami to give a speech to other lawyers about how to run a mass tort law firm. And I literally landed at the airport there in Miami, and my phone had just blown up. And I've got all sorts of texts, and I've got just hundreds of messages, and I've got emails. And there's this constant thread about Secret Service. And so we learned that 2 of our offices had been raided by the United States government. And of course that's always concerning, but I knew we hadn't done anything wrong. So I flew back, met with all of my staff, told them, look in the whites of my eyes, we did not do anything wrong. And I still had a great deal of faith in the government at the time. I mean, the big irony of where I'm at now is I had never been exposed to the criminal justice system before this happened, other than beating a ticket once, but I thought that anybody that got investigated probably did something. Anybody that gets indicted is probably guilty. I just never considered it, and I feel like a fool now. But what I realized is that there are 93 different United States attorneys' offices across the United States with 1,000 or so prosecutors. They have incredible power. There's a saying in our industry that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. It's a very low standard. The defendant's not invited in the room. The lawyers aren't in the room. It's just the prosecutor and a grand jury. And if the prosecutor wants an indictment, he's going to get one. And so the next thing you know, our offices are raided. I'm still thinking everything's going to work out fine because I know we didn't do anything. And the thing goes away for 2.5 years. In the midst of that, we're working on other big mass torts.
How do you mean? I'm sorry. How do you mean goes away? Like they went in,
just
and took
silence.
all this stuff. And,
Yeah.
Just silence.
Yeah, I mean, originally when they came into our offices, they said, well, we'll let you know whether we're going to do anything by June. And this is of 13. June comes and goes. September, December, the next year, 14. And eventually, I'm hearing whispers out of Mississippi, they've just dropped it. And I was like, well, good, that's appropriate. They should have. It was damaging to my firm to be subjected to all the innuendo, but at least they're doing the right thing. And then in July of 2015, some of us have what we call a Google alert so that you can see when somebody's written an article about you or you're mentioned in a news article. I get a Google alert, and I look on it, and it's a story from something called the Washington Free Beacon. And so my reaction is, what the hell's the Washington Free Beacon, right? And so I Google it, and it's a neoconservative Washington blog written by a guy named Michael Goldfarb for the Center for American Freedom. I say, what's the Center for American Freedom? It's a conservative advocacy group that's funded by the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former vice president, is on its board. Bill Kristol's on its board, and they're breaking this story about the fact that the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, a senator from Wisconsin named Ron Johnson, apparently felt like it was part of his duties to write the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, and to say, hey, why haven't you indicted Michael Watts? And insinuates he's a major Democratic donor, and it raises questions about why the Department of Justice has apparently declined to pursue charges. And so this thing that I think is over, all of a sudden I've got this senator from Wisconsin who cares a lot about a trial lawyer from San Antonio, apparently, basically ordering the Attorney General of the United States to indict me.
So it was a political motivation.
Well, not just that, but at the same time, I start seeing all sorts of articles about Julian Castro, the former mayor of San Antonio, who I had worked with on some cases, and they were insinuating that I was his patron or something, you know, and they're sliming him next to this guy who's under federal investigation. And of course, it's obvious why they were doing that. Julian Castro was on every short list to be Hillary Clinton's vice president that there was. And so they're just spamming him to death based on his association with me. And so you start thinking it's political. And then you have this political conservative blog that's threatening the United States Attorney General, you know, with all sorts of allegations of unfavorable, you know, press because she's not indicting me. 60 days later, there's a 95-count indictment. It's stunning.
And at the time, of course, for people that maybe don't keep up in the legal branch of the Attorney General's office, Loretta Lynch was part of Barack Obama's administration, also part of the Ferguson thing. Eric Holder subsequently took over,
she took over
him. So
and of course they put her in a spot. You remember when she was on the airplane with Bill Clinton? All of a sudden she's kind of in a recusal situation.
Yes.
Well, as soon as they write her the letter, well, why have you declined to pursue charges? Well, she's kind of in a point where she's got to let the local department make its choice. Well, the local department, the criminal division chief is a guy named John Dowdy. Mississippi's United States Attorney's Office was famous for going after trial lawyers. Dickie Scruggs, Paul Miner, a guy named Bob Arledge, all indicted during the Bush administration, and now the guys that did all that are coming after me. And so it was very tied to politics. When the indictment was announced, every article said, "Ready for Hillary mega donor," another Obama crony indicted, major Democratic funder. And so it was all about spamming somebody that was on the opposite side of the political fence from the people that somehow knew that a United States senator was demanding the indictment, somehow broke the story about an indictment on October the 23rd of 2015, even though it was still under seal. I didn't even know about it. And yet this conservative blog somehow runs a story on October the 23rd, breaking the news about the indictment of this major Democratic donor. And so it just stunk to high heaven.
So let me ask you this, bringing it back home, you get home, you were supposed to give that speech, you get home, look at your, you know, how about your family? What's going through their minds?
Well, you know, that's where I was very fortunate. My wife is a very strong woman of faith. There is no gray with respect to Tammy Watts. And most people that go through this experience, as you well know from people you've represented, they're being threatened with these long prison sentences. If you don't plead, you're going to do 25 years or something like that. And in order for anybody to plea, you're basically going to give up your law license for the rest of your life. And I told my wife, I said, look, I know the consequence is life in prison, but I know I didn't do this. I'm pretty sure I can prove it. Why should I have to give up everything I've ever worked for just because the federal government's applying pressure on you? And so I said, I'm not going to do it. And she said point blank, if you didn't do anything, we're going to fight it to the end. And she had my back. She was my rock. It was a remarkable display of support, both from my wife and my kids. Nobody was crying over spilt milk. Nobody was begging me to take the easy way out and serve 2 or 3 years, even though we didn't do it. They said, we're going to fight this, and we did.
Sounds like your wife and mine have a lot in common.
Well, I know they do, at least in one way, that we both married above ourselves. So,
there you go. And when you did this, a lot of people I know are probably thinking, wait a minute, and a lot of fear out there.
Sure.
Because you're a powerful white trial lawyer, Democrat, one of the white buffaloes, as you will, you know, a very rare commodity in America that's still fighting for the poor, the downtrodden, and not against, and totally against corporations. You come out in front and say, give me what you got. So they're giving you what you got, you know. So people out there, I'm sure, are thinking, well, if they can try to get him, what are they going to do to me? So they live in fear and they dare not speak out.
Yeah, you know, and that's a real problem because obviously what makes our society great is people's ability to speak out. And if they're threatened and suppressed, that's not good. But the shocking thing is that a single United States prosecutor with an agenda. Maybe it's political. Maybe it's just because he wants to take down a big trial lawyer and get a notch on his belt, has the power to completely disrupt the life of an American citizen. But they didn't just do it to me. They indicted my older brother, who works for me, who's the most honest man I've ever met. They indicted my paralegal for the alleged criminal act. All she did, all that was in the indictment, is that she signed her name to a forwarding letter that I told her to send to the Kirkland and Ellis law firm in Chicago. It was just outrageous. But the reason they do that is they're trying to indict family members to put pressure on the target to fold. You know, you can plead guilty to something and we'll let your brother off. They did it to Dickie Scruggs with respect to his son, who they indicted. So there's all sorts of levers. There were good people that used to work for my firm when I was here in Corpus Christi. I mean, right here in Corpus Christi, that were threatened with life in prison if they didn't give up the goods on Michael Watts. And to their credit, they had the character and the backbone to tell their own government, I'm not going to lie for you. And they were threatened repeatedly. There were people that used to work for me that were on the stand during the trial that told me afterwards that the government was still threatening to indict them if they didn't say X or Y or Z. It's just outrageous that this could happen here in the United States.
So, as you alluded to, your whole core, your whole belief in the system was shaken. Not just shaken, but devastated.
You know, the belief that the criminal justice system and its prosecutors, when they take an oath, that they're not there to get convictions, they're there to do justice, I thought that was true, and it turns out it's not. Now, my faith in the system, as long as we have a right to trial by jury, is as strong as ever. And I told the jury in my closing argument, you know, 1,000 years ago, there was no right to trial by jury. Even when we got the Magna Carta that established an independent judiciary, there still wasn't a right to trial by jury. We fought the Revolutionary War here in the United States 240 years ago, and the states did not want to allow a trial by jury. And three guys you may have heard of, Washington, Madison, and Jefferson, all refused to ratify the United States Constitution until they added a constitutional right to a jury of your peers before the state could throw you in jail. And I told those jurors, you're not only the answer to my prayers, you're all that separates my government from being able to strip the liberty from innocent people just because they want to. And the beautiful part about the experience is the prosecutors that came after me were from Jackson, Mississippi. And the Secret Service coming after all of my employees. And they're just fixated on the fact that Barack Obama had been at my house and all the political angles of it. But instead of indicting me in Jackson, Mississippi, that's an area that's 72% Democratic. They hauled us halfway across the state to Gulfport, Mississippi, which is one of the most conservative Republican counties in the state of Mississippi. So they're clearly trying to take a big Democratic, operative and going to tar and feather him in the most Republican area of town. But to the credit of the people of Gulfport and Biloxi, the most conservative area of Mississippi, 12 people who Michael Watts had never met show up and get picked for a 6-week trial. And God has never invented a better BS meter than 24 eyes on a jury. Mm-hmm. And they were able to look at the lack of evidence that their government put forth against 7 people that they indicted and say, well, look, you just don't have anything there as to Michael Watts, David Watts, Winter Lee, Eloy Guerra, another young lady, and then the 2 people who did the crime were convicted at the same time. And so, my faith in the system and the fact that American citizens, just like Washington and Jefferson and Madison said, they get to make the call before somebody goes to jail. Just the fact that government bringing charges isn't good enough. And so I have a lot of faith in the criminal justice system if a jury ever gets the opportunity to see the facts. But the problem is that the deck is so stacked in favor of the government that a lot of people can't afford to take the risk. They don't have the money. I mean, I had 19 people on staff working around the clock for 9 months, reading 4 million pages of documents, hiring all sorts of experts. Well, your average Joe on the street doesn't have the ability to take on the government like that, and so it's just impossible. That's what concerns me, is the system is stacked in the government's favor, and your average guy on the street has no opportunity to even protest his innocence. And so I'm convinced that we've got people filling up the jails in federal prison that don't deserve to be there just because they couldn't take the risk. So they plead guilty to a single count of conspiracy instead of risking 25 years in the federal penitentiary.
We've got mass incarceration in this country where we're 5% of the population, yet we house 25% of the world's prisoners. And 1 out of 3 African Americans is going to be on supervised release or incarcerated. And Latinos, I think it's like 1 out of 5. And even white males like yourself, the statistics are high.
Yeah.
And 97% plea. The 3% that go to trial, you got 1 out of 3 of those are going to maybe walk free, maybe not. 2 are for sure going to get convicted. So we got a 99% chance. But with all that going forward, you said, bring it on.
Yeah, and you've got to say bring it on if you did the right thing, because the jury is all you've got. But the public shaming that happens in this society, this so-called presumption of innocence until you're found guilty, it doesn't exist. I confess I didn't used to feel that way. When you walk in to a United States federal courthouse and then you walk into a United States courtroom, the jury's being led around by United States Marshals. The loudest knock you've ever heard on the door, bam, 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 and a guy with a robe that sits above everybody called the United States judge tells the clerk to call the case. United States versus Michael Watts. Are the parties ready? And then the prosecutor stands up and says, the United States is, Your Honor. It's intimidating as hell, and you start off behind. You just do. But the fastest way to catch up is the evidence is going to be the evidence, is going to be the evidence, and jurors can see right through nonsense. That's what they did here.
When you pick the jury, and a lot of people don't know this, the judge does most of the talking to pick the jury. So the deck, in my opinion, it's not like state court where you get to ask the questions within reason, you know, but the judge asks most of the questions in federal. So that starts out there. You can file motions to get to ask questions and things, or the judge allows it.
You know, and I got lucky. The judge in my case was the chief judge of the Southern District of Mississippi, Judge Louis Garola, former prosecutor, former United States Magistrate judge here in the Western District of Texas, but very pro-prosecution from everything that I'd heard. And he was violently opposed to me representing myself, and he was hostile about it. And I was just scared to death that he was going to give me a bad trial. And from the minute that jury walked in, he could not have been more fair. He could not have been more gracious. He could not have been more concerned with giving everybody a fair trial. And it's almost like God handed down the right judge for this case. And he was tough and he was formal, but he gave me a fair trial, which was good. And I hope that happens in every case. I wonder that it won't. But my experience was you give me a good judge and good juries and the right thing's going to happen. And that's what happened here.
What are some of the highlights of the trial that stick in your mind as the ones that maybe our viewers would just be blown away by? I mean, you've already given us information that's just probably shaking people's positions to the core, that if you get arrested, you get indicted, you must have done something wrong. And if you play by the rules, you never get arrested.
Well, you know, I kept expecting with a 95 count indictment that they would have some silver bullet that was just going to put a bullet right in my head for something I knew wasn't true, but I just figured they had to have that. Why would you go to all this trouble? And what was most shocking to me is the prosecution shows up and they've got nothing in their arsenal. They give a 13-minute opening statement. They call some witnesses, and I keep waiting for the witness that's going to say Michael Watts did anything wrong, and it never happened. For example, the first witness in the case, they're trying to start off with a bang, and they call the guy that ran the $20 billion settlement fund that BP was required by President Obama to set up. His name's Ken Feinberg. And Ken Feinberg is probably the most prominent alternative dispute resolution guy in the United States. He runs all sorts of funds. After 9/11, those 5,000 or 6,000 families that were directly impacted, Congress allocated about $5.5 billion to compensate them. He split the money up. Corporations hire him over and over and over again to administer funds that are used to settle these mass tort cases. Well, I'd done 9 or 10 cases with Ken. His partner, Mike Rosen, and I were good friends. Well, they call Feinberg up to prove up this document that's supposed to be bad for me. I didn't think it was any big deal. But he kind of gratuitously says, yeah, I was surprised by this because Michael Watts had a national reputation. And I remember thinking, well, that was very nice of him. to say that. So I started off my cross-examination. I said, Mr. Feinberg, they teach us in law school, never ask a question that you don't know the answer to, but here goes. And I said, in any of those 9 or 10 mass torts that your firm and my firm were involved in, did you ever see me once before the BP case press one case that you thought was fraudulent? Nope. In any of the people that we dealt with in all of these cases, did you ever even hear a whisper from anybody that I was known to be a fraudster? And the guy leans into the microphone, he says, never. And the jury's looking at the government like, what the hell was that? He's your star witness, and he just became the defense's star witness. That happened over and over and over again. And one of the reasons that I wanted to represent myself is the government can put somebody on, but then I get to cross-examine them. And we just turned prosecution witness after prosecution witness to a witness for the defense. And so I think that was a highlight. The second highlight was after 3 weeks of trial, and they still haven't laid a glove on us. One morning the prosecution stands up and they said, Your Honor, we rest. And right in front of the jury, the judge is looking as perplexed as he can be. He says, what? He goes, approach the bench. And then he dismisses the jury and he says, you rest? You and your compatriots need to go back and decide whether that's really what you want to do, because it's going to have profound consequences. And so then the government unrests, tries to put on some more evidence, but the case was so mortally wounded, they just knew that they weren't going to get there. And a lot of people
don't understand, and what irks me, and I don't mind saying, even though I have tremendous respect for federal judges, when you're pounding an agent, when you're pounding and making good ground in a cross-examination, as I've had, they can stop it.
Yeah.
And they can make it look like you're a bully. They can stop and start asking questions and even rehabilitating the witness. And it's happened to me many, many times.
And to Judge Garola's credit, he never went there.
But by him telling him, are you sure, is that his right?
Well,
I'm telling the government, are you sure you want to do this? Let me help you out and give you some advice. Think about it again.
Yeah, we all thought that was very unusual. And one of the defendants actually got up and objected to it. But to me, I was just more surprised because right there in front of the jury, the judge is expressing just dismay. That's all you've got.
It cuts both ways, right? He's telling them, I might give some sort of verdict before it even gets to the jury.
Exactly. And the problem is that he's confined by Rule 29, which is the only way that he can dismiss charges in an indictment, and it's a toothless tiger. He's almost unable to dismiss anything. And so we started off with 95 counts. Got rid of 22 of them before the trial. He was only able to dismiss another 7 of them because if you got a little bit of evidence of this and you can insinuate that, the judge's job is to let the jury decide. Yeah. And so you go through the stress of the jury coming back, and the good part was, and I felt like, of course, I knew 100% I didn't do anything wrong. I knew 100% my brother hadn't done anything wrong. My paralegal hadn't done anything wrong. I was about 98% sure that I had proven it. I mean, I felt like we were winning the trial. But when that verdict happens, that is the most awe-inspiring, terrifying moment of your life. I mean, the judge walks in. He's looking at a verdict. It seemed like 15 minutes, checking all the pages. I have no clue what the answer is. The jury walks in and he says, Michael Watts, rise and face your jury. And it's just intimidating as hell. And then they're reading off the details of each charge and not guilty. And they do it 66 times for 7 different defendants. Just reading the verdict took 2.5 hours.
At any moment, if you had gotten one count guilty, how much would you have spent minimum in prison?
5 years at a minimum, but more importantly, I never get to be a lawyer again, which is the reason I wasn't going to play any games and plead to something that I did not do.
And what's amazing to me is the other co-defendants, not one folded either.
The interesting part is I think I got lucky in that regard from this standpoint. As you know, in 2006, because one of my daughters got into a college prep school in San Antonio, we moved from Corpus Christi to San Antonio just to get her ready for college. So I had an office in San Antonio. My mass tort office was still here in Corpus Christi, but I was never in it. So all the communications with me were via email, and I still had all those emails. So try as they might to get somebody, an ex-employee or somebody with an axe to grind or somebody that got fired to come in and say, aha, he did it. They weren't able to do that there because there's a record of where I am at all time. I'm required by the FAA to keep that for my airplane. So there's a record where I'm at. All the emails are there and like that. So we had a documented defense that nobody could make up stuff against us. And the people that they tried to call to do it were just torn to shreds on cross-examination because it wasn't true. We were able to demonstrate that.
Well, I'm kind of winding down here because, I mean, you know, the thing is that during the trial, but I think you're the first lawyer I've ever met that's a great lawyer, but represented himself at trial. And I'm sure people used the old Lincoln thing on you and said, Michael, do you know what you're doing by representing yourself?
Yeah, it was definitely an unorthodox decision. My thought was that in a case where the government was insinuating that I had done something criminal to get on a plaintiff's steering committee, why not show the jury that I've been on a whole bunch of them? And the reason is because I'm trying the first case in the country in a lot of these torts. And so I felt like cross-examining witnesses, being up in front of the jury on a daily basis, would show them that I'm a real lawyer. And it worked out fine. But the other thing that I wanted to do is I was so furious that my government could do this to me, and the millions of dollars that it took to fight off these charges, I couldn't get out of my mind the fact that your average citizen on the street would just have to buckle under.
They have to plead.
Because it's a stacked deck. And so what we did, another violation of a rule, if you will, I got a call from a friend of mine. My wife's good friends with a Christian music artist named Stephen Curtis Chapman. And his wife, Mary Beth, is a good buddy of mine. And she calls me up about 4 months after the indictment. She goes, "Are you on Netflix?" And I swear to God, I said, "What's Netflix?" I didn't know. But then she says, "Well, you know." So I go to my son, and he teaches me how to get on Netflix. And she goes, "You got to watch Making of a Murderer." And it's this docudrama.
Making of a Murderer.
Yes,
Okay.
it's this docudrama about a guy who's wrongfully convicted of murder, spent 17 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit. When he gets out, a few years later, same prosecutors go after he and his nephew for a murder that the nephew did not commit. The nephew spends 8 years in prison before he's released. And so it gave me an idea, and that is the only way we're going to get this system changed is to tell this story. So as you know, I've been running around talking to lawyers, talking to groups about this experience. One of the reasons I wanted to come on and talk to you. But we did something very unorthodox. We hired a film crew, some guys that had produced I Am Legend, Chronicles of Narnia, and they came down to Gulfport, Mississippi and set up shop in the hotel where we were staying, and cameras all over our war room when we were preparing. GoPros in the vehicle taking me to and from court. We had drones with cameras flying around taking video. Of course, we couldn't get the cameras in the courtroom because it's federal court, but we wanted to contemporaneously show what it's like to go through one of these criminal trials. And of course, everybody told me not to do it because if the judge finds out, he's going to be upset. Or if they can get the videotape, they'll subpoena it and use it against you.
But I mean, I don't see how you didn't violate going in the court.
No, it wasn't a violation. It was just it was risky, but I felt like we had to get on film what was happening so people could see what American citizens go through when their government comes after them. And so we're developing that film. Hopefully you'll be in it as part of your role here. But we're gonna show it to all of the film festivals, Sundance Film Festival, Tribeca, South by Southwest, and hopefully educate the American people about what their government can do to them.
Well, you've got my permission and Dave's to use anything to help you.
Great.
And we've got some other. Now, the other thing is, people don't now on top of that, let's just stack everybody on top of the envy that it's an envious profession. People that maybe have not been as successful as you in the same game, maybe they were perhaps delighted that you were going through this. They'd get more business. I hate to say something ugly like that, but there are other people that filed civil suits against you too. And so you're still having to deal with that aftermath.
Yeah, we'll deal with that. There are people.
And I know you can't comment.
No, there are people that are going to try to make a buck off of a situation. But in the same way that a jury in the criminal case is shown the truth, if necessary, we'll show that we didn't do anything wrong there as well. But that's okay. I mean, it's people's right to file a lawsuit if they feel like they've been aggrieved. It's also my right to defend that lawsuit, and we'll do that. But the bottom line is that I think God put you in a situation for a reason, and I've always felt like He wouldn't give me anything that I couldn't handle. But now that it's over, I think my role after 27 years of doing nothing but civil litigation is to try to be an advocate for changing what are unfair rules in the criminal justice system. There's nothing justice about the criminal justice system. It's a stacked deck designed and orchestrated to get convictions. And I'm all for that if somebody did it. But if somebody didn't do it, why are we having a system where we're forcing people to lie, threatening them if they don't roll over on people, stacking the deck by withholding information, not recording interviews with material witnesses because you don't want the jury to see what they had to say? I mean, all of these things are things that we face, this game of hide and seek from the standpoint of the proof. Prosecutors in 2016 were doing that to an American citizen, and this prosecutorial misconduct's got to stop. And perhaps the best way to stop it is to put the story of this particular prosecutor who did this in TV screens across the United States, and maybe we can shame prosecutors to never do this again.
One question I had, there was a kind of change up of the prosecutors before your trial started, immediately before.
Yeah.
Is there any plausible explanation for that?
All I can tell you is we get indicted, we go and we do the perp walk at the arraignment in October. We're set for trial in December. They had kind of warned me that there was going to be a continuance. Everybody gets one continuance, and I objected to it under the Speedy Trial Act. But I remember the judge telling everybody, hey, make sure you make your deals with Mr. Dowdy. That was the prosecutor. If you haven't cut your deals, we're going to trial on February the 1st. So I'm kind of glad that we're going to trial. We show up on January the 18th, and Dowdy kind of winks at the judge that he's not ready. And all of a sudden, there's a 6-month continuance. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And we're rocking along. And of course, nobody can flip on me because I didn't do it, and I can prove that I didn't do it. So it wasn't going to do him any good. And so this guy had told the judge it's the most important case of his career. It's all he's working on. He's got the entire resources, the entire department working on this case, and he'll be there. It's going to last 10 weeks. Well, when he couldn't get anybody to flip and to say things that weren't true, all of a sudden he's looking at his file. He's got nothing. He can't prove his case. And instead of having the honor of dismissing the charges, or instead of having the courage to show up and take the loss, he tucks tail and he quits 2 months before this trial.
That's what happened.
Why would you quit? You're quitting to avoid a loss that you know is coming because you indicted the wrong man. An incredible act of cowardice.
And malicious prosecution, is there certain causes of action that people can bring out there that go through an ordeal like you, that if by miracle survive it? Can they bring malicious prosecution, or is there immunity?
Yeah, there's almost absolute immunity that's held by prosecutors. It's called qualified immunity, held by investigators. There is a law called the Hyde Amendment, where people can bring suit to try to get some of their expenses back if they were wrongfully prosecuted. Unfortunately, the way that the Congress set that up, it defines a person who can file such a lawsuit as having a certain net worth below a certain amount.
Yes.
And I don't qualify, so I have no rights. And so, functionally, when the judge said, Mr. Watts, you're free to go, that would have been the end of the story, but for the fact that we're going to make this documentary and show the American people exactly what this prosecutor did, what the Secret Service did, all the rights that they violated, and the injustice of what they did. Because if you don't get that story out, they'll just do it again.
In the aftermath, let's start with the interim. How did it impact your law practice?
Well, it's never good to be indicted. Your business can dry up in a hurry. Fortunately, my firm was very successful before this broke. We had a lot of stuff to work on, and I'm very proud to say our clients stuck with us.
That's great.
What I learned is you have a lot fewer friends than you thought you had, mm-hmm. but you have a lot better friends than you thought you had too.
Right.
And so guys that you thought were your friends that you haven't talked to in 3.5 years, they were never your friend in the first place. But boy, you certainly saw the people that stood by you, and sent you the texts and made the supportive phone calls and offered to help. There's a lawyer in Houston, Texas, one of the godfathers of the mass tort litigation world. His name is George Fleming. And I asked him to be an expert for me, and he didn't charge me a nickel and didn't so much as flinch. He said, you tell me when to be in Mississippi and I'll be there. And the guy came and just batted it out of the park. So that kind of friendship that you didn't know you had, right. That's very gratifying, very gratifying. And then, I said something the last day of trial that I wish that they would have allowed cameras in the courtroom, because you're sitting there on trial for your life and you turn around and there's probably 75 people in the courtroom, all your family, all your very close friends, and you just see them all there in just unmitigated support. And I said, that's what love looks like.
Yes.
And you know, the jury's verdict is being read, and 66 counts of not guilty for me. I'm holding my brother's leg, well, 66 counts of not guilty for him. I'm holding my paralegal's hand, 66 counts. And then we're done, right? But then there's 4 more defendants, and so we're still there for another hour and a half. And I turn around and I see all those same people that exhibited nothing but love, and every one of them is just crying uncontrollably with relief and compassion and love. And so the American jury system it's the best system in the world. And thank God for Jefferson and Madison and Washington insisting that every single United States citizen has a right to a trial by jury before his government can throw him in jail. Because that's the only thing that kept me out of the abyss, was 12 people who I'd never met from Mississippi that showed up to do their duty and did the right thing.
And we've got people being arrested and laws being passed where you can't even protest now.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
Against things. So, I want to thank you for being on, and I
Absolutely.
think
Thanks for what you do.
Yeah, and the friendships that you were mentioning, I think that you've gotten a whole lot more friends now, because a lot of people on the criminal side that have gone through what you've gone through, one person could have easily lied on that stand and tried to damage your case, but the goodness and the truth came through.
And the beauty, and I never really gave them credit because I didn't know what to do, but people who practice criminal law, it's such an honorable profession. When you can be the only thing standing between the government and jail for an innocent person.
That's right.
And what's inside the heart of a criminal lawyer is the only thing separating an innocent man from jail. And I had the good fortune of hiring a guy named Mikal C, who I think is the best criminal lawyer in the state. He represented my brother while I was representing myself. And God sent Mike McCrum to me. He was there. He stood in the gap for me and my family, and I will never forget that. He's my brother, and he is my savior. And there's a whole lot of innocent people out there who have as their lawyer their savior, and delivered them from certain jail. So it was an amazing, emotional, rewarding experience, as strange as that sounds.
I always say closing arguments for our audience. What would you like to tell those people out there? I think you brought up one important thing, which was if they got arrested, they had to have done something. They got indicted, they had to have done something, and your whole core was shaken. But to everybody out there, black, Latino, white, everybody that's watching this and that's going to watch your documentary, and I want them to be surprised, but do you want to divulge the name, or is there a name for it yet?
Yeah, I think it's going to be called In Deep Water.
In Deep Water, I love it. What would you like to tell those people out there that are watching?
What I would say is this. We've got the best system in the world, but this presumption of innocence until proven guilty, we need to give everybody that goes through an investigation or an arrest or an indictment the benefit of that doubt. That's what the constitutional framers wanted us to do. And so assuming everybody's guilty doesn't do the system the justice that it should. We should assume that everybody's innocent until the government comes in and proves otherwise, beyond a reasonable doubt. We're not supposed to take away people's liberties based on what's on the internet or innuendo or whispers or gossips. Our system is a just one because we demand strict proof. And my only regret is that the only thing that jury could do for me was write down not guilty. What I wanted them to be able to do was write down innocent with an exclamation point, because that's what I am.
Well, you've been watching Michael Watts right here on South Texas Crossfire. We've had the honor to interview him, and also you've got information for him. People want to just, email you and just tell you congratulations, or, just have a question or anything. What's the magic email to get a hold of you at?
mcwatts@wattsguerra.com.
mcwatts@wattsguerra.com. Thank you so much for coming by. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
And that's it for us. And remember, innocent before proven guilty. I wish we could underline that and write it in stone everywhere. Thank you all. and God bless.